Um, we've hosted field days, online training sessions, and online informal discussions with grazers, farmers, landowners, educators, and stakeholders about the benefits of regenerative grazing. And we look forward to hosting more events and sharing more resources in the future. You can find the page about the EGP and our events and our resources on our CCSWCD website, which we'll share in the chat. I'm sure most of you came across that when you're in your registration process, but easy to access here in the chat. I'll pass it back over to Nicole.
Awesome. Thanks, Erin, for that brief background. We are so happy to have all of you here. I am Nicole Haberback of the University of Illinois Extension, and I will be facilitating today's session. I'd like to thank the members of the Embrough Grazing Partnership for organizing this series. Mallory Krieger of Tierra Alosa, Jennifer Jones of Illinois Soybean Association, Erin Gundy, Morgan Cobble, and Ivan Dozier of Champaign County Soil and Water Conservation, Jesse Schaefer of the Land Connection, Katie Bell of the University of Illinois Extension, and Kelsey Virgin of the Pasture Project. This series is funded in part by North Central SARE's Professional Development Program. And today is part 2, which focuses on cover crops and residue. And we are joined today by Jim Iserman, farmer and soil health specialist with the Illinois Sustainable Ag Partnership, and Greg Thoren, a farmer from Stockton, Illinois. Jim and Greg will share their knowledge and experiences associated with grazing cover crops and residue in a joint presentation, followed by a moderated question and answer session. As we progress through today's talk, you can drop your questions into the chat box and we'll get to them at the end, or you can also raise your hand and ask your questions verbally if you feel more comfortable with that as well. So with that being said, I will let Jim get things started.
All right, thank you, Nicole. I'm going to get my screen to share here, which may take just a quick second. I get all the right windows up to function. All right, can everybody see the screen okay?
Yep.
Good. All right, well, it's good to be back on this group. I had the opportunity to talk about a year and a half ago or so. So hopefully, I don't know if we have anybody that is repeating and has come back. For my part, I may hit on some of the same topics I was able to hit on last time, but I'm also excited to be joined by Greg Thoren today. We'll spend a lot of time talking about Greg's operation because, quite frankly, what he is doing is far more interesting than what I'm doing at this point. So, but as mentioned, I work with the Illinois Sustainable Ag Partnership as a soil specialist. I'm an independent crop conservation crop consultant working for a couple of different organizations, but I also farm near Streeter, Illinois with my father, and we actually started a livestock operation when I got back on the farm out of college about 20 years ago, which it's hard to believe it's been that long. So on our own operation, we do, we're beef. Right now, we're just a cow-calf operation. We've done some feeding steers in the past, but at the moment, we're, really just kind of concentrating on keeping that cow-calf operation going. We're going to talk a lot about, the part that I'm going to kind of hit on today is going to be that importance of cover crops, but also of, grazing corn stalks, which is just, I think, real key for anybody in trying to raise commodity beef cattle in Illinois. Corn stalks are probably going to play a role in keeping that system profitable. But I am primarily in a commodity business, so I'm not direct marketing. I'm not raising organic or anything like that. So I think that's always a good, important aspect to keep in mind. I do farm with my father, David. You can see up there on the picture, that's me and him on the left-hand side. Greg is there on the right-hand side on one of his many field days that he likes to host. Greg is a great speaker and a great educator, sharing all the things that he does on his farm. I will say that the cattle are a little mismatched. His are on the left. They're diagonal from each other. Those are his cattle on the lower left. They're mine on the lower right. So I want to make sure that I give Greg credit for his cattle. But Greg, I'll give you a quick minute to give an introduction, if you don't mind, and then we can kind of start going through some slides and pictures.
Okay, there we go. I'm Greg Thoren. I do appreciate the introduction, Jim. You're far too kind. I've learned a lot of my knowledge from you, so we're going to give you credit back. I grew up in a livestock surroundings, you might say. My father actually dairied and had hogs when I was young. Then he transitioned to beef cattle and hogs, and I had cattle through 4-H and FFA, and I've always enjoyed livestock. I enjoy livestock a lot more the last 10 years. We only have beef cattle right now, but it's been very rewarding, and we'll talk about some of these other things that I've discovered through the help of other people and trying to re-educate myself, just like Jim had said with cover crops. And I can give you some of my cropping background too, how this all ties in together. We do direct market a number of head a year. We do sell some feeder calves. The last year, actually, to a gentleman that has direct marketed all those calves. And it's been a very, very interesting and rewarding program that I think we're doing. So other than that, I guess I'm going to put it back to Jim.
Great. So I've been working, with Greg. I think we started in 2017 as part of the Soil Health Partnership, working with some cover crop trials. I think it is important to note where Stockton, Illinois is. It is how many miles from the Wisconsin border are you, Greg? You're pretty close.
We're about 15 miles from Wisconsin and about 40 miles from the Mississippi River. So we're right up here, the northwest part of the state, protecting the state from Wisconsin and Iowa, but wish we were in either one of the states.
So it's always been a great resource to work with Greg, because as we hear so often talking about cover crops or many of these practices, everybody always wishes they were about 100 miles farther south. So it's always great to have that knowledge of what Greg is doing about as far north as you can be in the state of Illinois, and realizing, if he can make these things work, then there's going to be a role for them in other places farther south. I will also note that where I'm at, there is very little pasture ground, when our livestock operation is basically on previous corn and soybean acres. We have converted flat ground into pasture. And so it's a little bit different of a paradigm when we talk about how we manage our cattle. So in order to be profitable, we have to look at things like corn stalks and cover crops in order to keep our costs low, in order to keep our opportunity costs. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on corn stalk grazing necessarily, but that is what I'm going to hit on. I think everybody is going to be aware how important feed costs are. Again, how those feed costs relate to opportunity costs. It's one thing if you have a pasture or ground that is unsuitable for other crop production, that's going to play a big role as to whether or not your operation is profitable. But if we want to expand livestock and cattle operations out from those areas and get more pasture, we have to really be thinking very heavily about our feed costs, and that's going to constitute our opportunity costs as well. So I got these little flip-flops, but you can see here, this is just some work from the University of Nebraska, looking, 40 to 60% of our expenses are going to be in feed costs. For someone like me, that may not be represented as far as a check that is being written off the farm by any means, but it is definitely having to look at a pasture, an acre of ground, looking at it from that opportunity cost. If I could have produced 180 bushel corn crop off of it, I have to factor in those expenses, or that as an expense, at least the profit off of that, to take a look at what my costs would be in terms of feed. So anytime I can utilize things such as corn stalks or cover crops, if I can utilize those other acres that are already producing corn or soybeans to help keep my feed costs down, that's extremely important. So corn stalks, right off the bat, that's a huge resource we have in the state of Illinois. They get a little bit of a bad rap, I think, as a lower quality feed. There's some reasons that is somewhat unjust, I feel, because they can really be pretty good quality. So in this top level, you can see how we start going through the calculation to really figure out how much quality feed could actually be out there after a corn harvest. The old rule of thumb that I always went by was for every pound of corn that you produce, there's an equal pound of corn stover left on the field. It is important to note that not all of that is good quality feed. However, cows are very interested in eating the husks and the leaves off these fields and can actually produce pretty good quality for that. Whereas we don't really want to force them to have to eat stalks and the stems that are out there that aren't that great of quality. So you can see here kind of a basic calculation. This one is a little bit different. I kind of started going back for this presentation, trying to find some things. Again, this is from the University of Nebraska, how they're calculating what you can figure on being able to graze off a bale of corn stalks. So they're really looking more, every bushel of corn is producing 16 pounds of leaf and husk, because again, that's the part that is good quality. So again, your grazing plan is remove 50% of it. And I think that's pretty realistic. You're just not going to be able to, you don't want to count on removing everything from the field. But there is a good amount of feed out there. So even with what is a pretty conservative calculation here, 200 bushel corn, there's about 1,600 pounds of forage available out there for those cows. So this is looking at 30 cow days, per 100 bushels of corn produced. So if you start thinking about how many acres of corn that we have out on these fields in Illinois, there's obviously a lot of forage availability out there that if we manage it right, and that is a huge part of this, is how we manage this, can be available for us for good livestock feed. So to look a little more specifically at corn, I got kind of a blurry picture, but these are my cows out grazing right now. We did initially start off rotationally grazing or restricted grazing, where I was giving them about 3 days worth of feed a day. I did that for a number of days when the weather was getting a little bit better, but as the weather started to turn, I've kind of dropped the fence and given them the whole field so they can kind of take advantage of those corn stalks before the bad weather sets in. But they can average anywhere between 3 to 6% on protein. This is probably the biggest limiting factor as far as being able to graze corn stalks, because this is kind of at the very low end on what could get a dry cow in mid-gestation through. So that's, keep in mind, if we have any calves or anything out there that would have a higher nutrient demand, we can't get by with just corn stalks. And even dry cows, this is really kind of borderline on the protein side of things. But they can usually provide adequate amount of energy, again, as long as we are grazing the husks and the leaves. We're not forcing them to eat the stalks, and we are taking advantage of them earlier in the year when they're basically fresh and they haven't weathered too much. So that begins to be more of an issue too as time goes on, that quality. So what we've started doing now is setting out bales. At first I was setting out some bales every other day. So basically it was enough that they would eat it down in one day, and then they would be grazing corn stalks the next day, just to kind of limit some of the packaged feed that I've been having to feed them, but I'm still supplementing their protein adequately for them. And now as the weathers continue to go on and I have some calves out in that field, I'm essentially feeding them hay. You know, they always have hay in front of them right now all the time. So they're eating primarily hay, but they still go out and they're still grazing some of those corn stalks. And it's still reducing my feed cost by just having them out there as they kind of finish up this field and getting the last good things out there. So the time of the year is extremely important though, because, you know, as it gets rained on frequently, this has been a good year for grazing corn stalks because it's been kind of dry. You know, as we harvested the field, that's had very little rain on it. And that's kept the quality of those corn stalks much better than if it had received frequent rain. So as you're managing and thinking through taking advantage of corn stalks for your livestock, you have to keep those things in mind. Corn stalks, we always bale a lot of corn stalks for bedding as well. And I know a lot of people bale corn stalks for feed and use it as part of their ration. Again, when we look at grinding these corn stalks or somehow utilizing them where we're taking advantage of a whole plant, which is always kind of something that we're just ingrained to take advantage of everything as farmers. We want the yield, we want the poundage. So we grind that whole thing up, but we have to keep in mind that when we're using the stalk, which is that lower quality feed, we start to reduce the overall quality. So when you're looking at something like a bale, I mean, we just set our bales out and let them pick through it. So again, they can go through and get the husks and the leaves that they want out of it, and then they use the stalk part for bedding. Whereas if you were to try to grind that up and put it in a feed ration, well, now you have that lower quality stalk in there that oftentimes is going to reduce the quality of that feed. So it's always that difference between quantity and quality. So keep that in mind as we look at trying to take advantage of corn stalks. You know, annuals, Greg's going to talk a lot more on this, so I won't get too involved in this, but we've done a number of different things over the years to try to take advantage of getting high quality feed, high tonnage feed. You know, at the end of the day, it's just amazing to think, but you know, annuals just tend to out yield permanent pastures. So as much as we like to have those permanent pastures, at least for us, using an annual system, we can oftentimes get more tonnage per acre. Again, as I'm worried about my yield per acre, how important that is, because I have that crop ground as an opportunity cost, becomes very important. So on the left, we have some oats and radishes following the wheat field, which has always been a great system. If you have wheat in rotation, we've taken that out. And then on the right, we got cows grazing some sorghum Sudan grass. Cereal rye is going to be the last kind of big thing I talk about before I kick it over to Greg. But this has been a pretty good system for us over the years. As we've gotten away from our corn, soybean, wheat rotation, I will also say we have some issues with the herbicides that we're using as far as getting cover crops established and being able to graze them according to the label. We've come to rely more and more on cereal rye because it is extremely winter hardy. We can plant it after our corn harvest. We can graze it in the springtime ahead of our soybeans. And it is actually on label for some of our corn herbicide programs that we can put together, so we can plant it, making sure we're checking all the boxes. And it's been a good program to be able to get some early season grazing or even some baling of this. So this is, we're still at least sometime. I didn't do it this last year, but we'll get back to doing it again as I get some of my logistics worked out. But doing some of the cereal rye grazing in the springtime. The cows, we usually restrict the fence in some way, but this allows us to get out and get a couple weeks worth of grazing while our pastures are still in kind of that washy stage before you really want to let them out in the pastures, but you don't want to feed them hay anymore. It's been a really good opportunity to put them out and get some grazing on cereal rye. We do need to watch out for that wet weather. You saw that earlier, to make sure that we're not having any issues with compaction. But cereal rye, here's just some forage tests that we've done over the years, just to give a little quick inference of how quickly the quality of it changes. And this can be true for many of our forages when we're grazing. But you can see at the boot stage, cereal rye can give us really good nutrition, 11.7% crude protein, good TDN, good RFQ. But as it grows up, and we can get a lot more tonnage at this post-flowering stage, but we see that significant drop in crude protein. So keep those things in mind as we start to integrate these systems into our program. If you're going to graze, knowing your forage quality becomes extremely important because it changes so rapidly. If you're just feeding in a feed lot or something like that, it's more of a formula. You can add a little of this, add a little of that to make your nutrients up if needed. But when you're grazing, it's a different story. So I'm probably going to go ahead and bring Greg in then. And Greg, I've got a bunch of your pictures queued up. I'm sure you remember the order in which you gave them to me, so you can walk through them all. But definitely, I real quick, if there's any questions kind of specific to the grazing of the corn stalks or anything else you'd like me to go over more in depth, please let me know. Otherwise, we'll let Greg kind of walk through his system a little bit, and then and I'm sure I will have some questions for Greg as we go through. So I do reserve the right to stop you mid-sentence, Greg, and ask you something about your program as needed. So here's, hopefully everybody can see me bringing over some of the pictures from Greg. Let me get you back to starting at the beginning here. Greg starting off with a nice picture of a cow manure. What a great way to start here, Greg.
Yes, that's very vital to our operation. I do appreciate Jim's information on grazing corn stalks. From what I understand, about 80% of those nutrients in the leaves and husks or whatever that beef animal eats gets returned back to the soil. And this is the best part about it, because not only returning those leaves and husks back, you're returning just a tremendous amount of microbes back into that soil to help the soil health aspect of it. And I'll probably hit on that more. So that this is basically the main reason we're doing it: soil health wise, water quality wise, even air quality wise, soil erosion wise, all the aspects of you might say the general conservation terminology. If you kind of look on this cow pie, there's a little bug down there on the kind of the left. Yep, there you go, Jim. That is one of probably at least 3 to 5 species of dung beetles that we have in our area. Actually, I've heard about them prior, and I've got a retired veterinarian that's a dear friend that actually started his practice up here in Stockton when I was in grade school, and he's helping me out here. And 2 years ago, I says, Dr. Bob, what are those holes in that manure paddy? And he says, well, I think they're flies. I think that's where the fly is. And I said, you check that out and see. Well, there again, he's 72, 74 years old, very knowledgeable person. And he said, they're not flies, they're dung beetle holes. So he's learning with me, and it's been the people we're associated with, Jim and his group, and a lot of other people, it's been very interesting. But basically the dung beetles, they'll take manure down into the soil. Dung beetle lives like 99% of its life in dung, and it's just amazing. It's a tremendous soil health aspect of it. There's another nice paddy. One thing we do have to watch, though, is that we cannot use insecticides that harm the dung beetle. We're actually with crop dung beetle and other beneficials, I should say. We're actually taking fecal samples as far as a worming procedure with the cows and calves, and we've done that 3 different times this summer. And we've actually turned a pasture that we had some very bad intestinal worms with calves on one pasture that has been continuous pasture with the previous landlord. And we'd always take our cattle off in the winter, but the parasite would overwinter. And we basically clean that up in a year by rotational grazing. And that consists of not letting those animals in any one paddock for more than 5 days, and not returning those animals to that paddock for at least 6 weeks. We've improved our soil health. We do no longer rotary mow those pastures. We do not, whatever's left is, they'll knock it down the second time, especially in the spring flusher grass. And it's just tremendous how these pastures increase. This here is a project that we've started probably at least 10, if not 12 years ago. We feed loose mineral in the sun, well, basically year round when the cattle will consume it. And those little plants in there, we've increased our legume population in our pasture by actually putting red clover, predominantly red clover, but we've gone to a lot of different species of legumes and even some grasses. The grasses, of course, they get digested in the animal's gut. The small seed seems to pass through better. Large seed doesn't. It gets broken down too much. But this is how we've actually reseeded, or I feel reseeded, our wonderful hills here in Joe Davis County. We cannot get a seeder, a no-till drill, even sometimes a fertilizer buggy on some of these areas. So the cow naturally carries it around and reseeds it for us. And we've been very, very delighted with this system. There's just another picture of kind of the same thing. I get pretty excited about cattle manure. We do, you can see the topography is a little different than where Jim lives. We have the last 2 years with the Gallagher fencing system, we've been road grazing. This is a township road, not highly traveled, but traveled. And we basically clean up the weeds, the grass, brush, whatever, from the edge of the road to the road fence, or to the fence along the field. And we don't even charge the township for doing it. I can keep my cattle off of my, that's the second crop there on that similar, or the same stretch that I believe. We can keep our cattle off of pasture, maybe a group, there's about 30, I think 35 cows and calves in that group possibly, but we can keep the cows and calves off of a pasture for about possibly up to 2 weeks. So that gives you more time for my rotational grazing and different things. Actually, in the background of that cattle to the left, that field was actually dry this past year, and we interseeded cover crops in there, which I am feeding those cows on a restrictive basis here right now. And basically we have this bunch of cows, which we combine these and another bunch together. We've got about 80 head in there. We have not fed any hay to that group of cows yet. And they're on, they've been on corn stalks. They're again regulated with fence. And this cover crop mix, multi-species cover crop. This is a group of fat cattle from 2 years ago. Don't pay attention to the bad corn on the left. That was an experiment. We do a lot of experimenting, and some things do not turn out quite like we'd like to see, but we do learn a lot. If you look straight to the north or straight above those cattle's backs, that was actually what I do is my fat cattle, I give them a strip of fresh grass every day. And the reason for that is naturally they like to eat that way. That's their natural position. And they will actually in the mornings, usually I'm up there in the summer between 5:30 and 6:30, and they will run feed in the bunk, and they will actually leave that feed and follow me out because they know they're getting a new forage. Now, I just learned here a couple of weeks ago that actually any grain, corn, soybeans, wheat, rye, whatever is high in omega-3s because it's the better energy storage, different things. In grass, the leaves on those plants or grass, which these animals are consuming, is high in omega-3. And just pass this along that found out too in David Montgomery's book, What My Food Ate. I have not read it yet, but I'm planning on it. But he mentions there, and Gabe Brown did also mentioned that he has higher omega-3 levels in his beef because he grass finishes beef and has 40 to 60 different species that he finishes cattle on. He's got higher omega-3 levels in his beef than salmon. So there is a reason why we do these things.
Sorry, Greg, I was
fencing
trying to
system that I
unmute there.
do.
But so these are your fat cattle. So you're basically feeding them out on pasture, correct? That's basically what the system is.
They do get a high forage. They'll probably have a round bale with several different species in for some more dry matter. They will have a chopped in siloed forage mix. I don't know if these were on a multi-species mix, as in maybe 8 to 10 different mixes, or if they were on a peas and oats mix. I kind of forget. And then they do get some high moisture shelled corn. Now, everything I produce, everything I grow is non-GMO, everything. And we do not buy any soybean meal, gluten, whatever. Everything that we feed our animals comes off of my farm, which theoretically it should. My carbon footprint's lower, the production's, it just makes sense. We're a closed system. The only thing we do buy is white salt and a mineral mix. And actually, when these animals are on a multi-species cover crop or even chopped product, they will not eat mineral. We have it out there, free choice. They will not consume mineral. They are getting the mineral through the plants, through the recycling of the nutrients in the soil from the different plant root depths and the different species themselves. It's been very, very interesting to see this. And you put them straight back onto corn stalks or something else, and they'll start eating mineral again. And then you put them back on the other mix. You can just about tell how this is all going to work, and it's held true the last number of years.
Yeah, is this the best slide to discuss your the fencing that
Yes.
you want to?
Yes, this is a Gallagher fencing system. We just buy these S20 fencers. I think they'll do like 20 miles or something of fence. Of course, some of ours are only 300 foot long or less. We just keep on that style. Very, very good system. The 3-to-1 gear reel, and then that's the turbo wire that's on that. Very simple system. I enjoy putting it up, taking it down. My wife doesn't so much, but she's semi-retired from the beef cattle. We're both 65 this year, but it's just amazing what you can do with that wire. We've actually loaded cattle with that wire. We've sorted cattle with that wire. It just, once they get used to it, it's amazing. Here's actually an equip program back in 2010. If you can see the white posts, that's 5 strand. Yep, 5-strand high tensile wire. And then we had 6 paddocks, and then we integrated the pasture beyond the trees from the neighbors. So we 5 paddocks, that would make the 6 with the neighbors. And then we thought we move these animals every day. They're right by our house, south and west of our house. And we move these animals every day because they are young animals. And this is how we do it. That's all electric fence. The high tensile is all electric, so it's pretty easy. We don't need to be moving fencers. We just move fence and use a jumper wire, and it's just tremendous. And our pastures are, again, we have not flipped those pastures for the last 3 years since we've been doing this. Anything that is left out there, of course, gets returned, and we do a different pattern every year when we start the pattern, so we don't basically get between the grass species and the insects and everything. We'll say we just got a different timing on when they get pastured or interrupted the first time of every year.
All right, I'm gonna try to switch to selecting some pictures of more of your cover crops, and looks like some of your seeding. So if there's some picture that you're thinking of that you want me to pull up, let me know.
Nope, we'll just talk as we go here. This is what we seeded this last this actually after wheat and rye this year. There's probably, I think there's about 12 to 15 different species in there, and we blend them all together, and they're basically we plant everything about 1 inch deep. The big seed will bring help the little seed come out, and it's been very successful on that end. We have this last year, I had too much. There were actually no-tilling the species into this cereal rye cover crop. If you notice, the straw is tall. I bought a Shelbourne Reynolds stripper head last year because I wanted to leave all of my carbon in the field, all of my straw in the field. I've sold hay since I've been out of high school. We've sold a lot of straw through the years. We all make mistakes, let's put it that way. And as far as erosion wise, this particular field is very highly erodible. It's wet. There's maybe only anywhere from several inches to maybe 6 to 8 inches of topsoil on this field in places. The bottom behind us is, of course, a little deeper. But we do have the cattle on this field right now, the cows anyway, and they're doing very well. And there's just a mat of residue there with this silver rye straw, you might say, and the erosion factor is minimal, just minimal. This is a picture taken not too long ago, maybe a week or two. What we are grazing now, you can see the oats and the millet, and a lot of these annuals are frosted out. I believe that on the left is probably a sunflower, that bigger plant. We got clovers, we've got the greener stuff in there would either be rye and or wheat, and that was actually came off of the stripper head. I did not have the expertise of running that stripper head the first year, so we have at least a 3 to 5 bushel of even grain that I lost off of that head, and I wasn't too concerned about it because I did not have that windrow behind the combine, because that stripper head will only take about less than 5% of that total crop into that combine, and I can thresh it and clean it a lot better there in the machine, but I don't have that strip behind the center of the combine. I like this a lot better. I've got better ground coverage, especially on this highly erodible land. And actually, there's one field where we had wheat, same scenario. We pastured it earlier, and we're going to actually leave that. And there are legumes in there, and there's other species in there. Of course, we do a lot of vetch, buckwheat, all these different species, but we're going to actually leave that last year's wheat field for wheat for next year, because we've got this cover crop and the grazing situation, the multi-species cover crop and the grazing situation in it. And we did that early when it was dry, and we're going to leave that as wheat and see how it looks in the spring. And if things look well, we're going to harvest that as wheat again, and just keep that system going for at least another year here. This is radishes here. You can see what the livestock consume. This is what the cover looks like on our ground. With the straw, we do not want to see the ground. Maybe down in Champaign County, you guys like seeing black, but you also see a lot of black snow drifts. I don't like seeing the ground. I want to keep my soil where it's at. I've got very concerned landlords with that same mentality. They basically tell me I do not want to lose any soil, and I don't tell them, but that's almost impossible. But I am doing everything I can to confirm the wishes, you might say. These are radishes that actually the cattle were in for a short time. You can see where they've been eaten off. They will eat them either right off to the ground, or if they're not forced, but if they're in an area long enough with corn stalks, they will come back and consume these radishes.
So these are,
Or excuse me,
turnips.
excuse me, turnips.
So, yeah,
And that big
previous
brown
picture.
stalk that, yep, that big brown stalk there is a sunflower that they tipped over, you might say.
I will say one year I did do a blind taste test of the cattle. I had, so half the field was in radishes and half the field was in turnips, and cows do prefer turnips 2-to-1 over radishes if they have the choice. But
Okay.
oops, I don't know if this will probably be a video. Let's move to here we go.
Okay, there's 60-inch row corn. This season, actually, we did not get this drone seeded till about the second weekend in September. We would have done it earlier, but the operator that we had hired to do that actually crashed his drone, and it was a number of weeks before he got another one around and could get to my place. There's 5 different brassicas in here and annual ryegrass. Of course, when that froze out here, we turned the cattle on that just a couple weeks ago. There's not much out there, and I expected that. I just want to see how the system would work. This particular field, it's kind of interesting. It's a really shaly field, slopey, not very good, wet. The average 10-year corn yield on that would be probably about 140 bushel. This 60-inch row corn, we planted at 32,000, so there's 64,000 in a row, give or take. If I can drop that many, this field averaged 175 over the scale. We do know we had a spectacular year this year. This corn looked phenomenal, especially in the spots which I couldn't figure out where the corn was usually the worst. But 2 years prior to this, it was out of crop production. We'd seeded it in the spring. That first year, we didn't get to it quick enough, but we did graze this. The field's probably 36 acres. The whole area is about 40 acres. We did have enough feed. We started October 1st, actually grazed. This was 3 years ago, I think. Grazed through 2 different snow events. And those cattle, 80 head, 80 cows and 80 calves, 40 acres lasted them 30 days. And they look fantastic. 2 weeks in there, they were strip grazed. We moved them every day. My wife said, well, why don't you just give them the whole thing? Then we don't have to be putting fence up every day or move them every day. I says, well, it's no different than if I gave you a month, if you had a month's worth of feed, you're going to eat all the good stuff you like, and you're going to walk around until you find more good stuff. You're going to stomp everything in the ground, and all these other aspects why we do what we do here with adaptive grazing. And then in 2 weeks, all these cows and calves are gonna be bellowing at me, and they got all this stuff stomped in the ground. And then I can control my manure pattern so much better. It just phenomenal. The second year we did graze this twice, strip grazed it twice, and it would just, I feel it was unbelievable how that soil changed around. And we actually just pulled some deep soil samples for the University of Illinois through a National Science Foundation program that I got connected up with the Illinois Farm Bureau. So pretty interesting stuff. Actually, the gentleman that pulled the samples, he said this is probably one of the more diverse fields he's sampled in the state. And one of the nice things is he says one of my samples is probably the worst sample he's taken in the whole state. So I find that I guess we can be number one up here in Joe Davis County, but sometimes we're maybe on the bottom end instead of the top end. This is a cow patty of my cover crops. One of the things I learned this year is that I've got way too many brassicas in this year's mix, and the cow's tails and the calves' tails were wet. And not that they were bad, I guess bad wet, but there's enough moisture and protein in these species that we planted that we had manure, but you can see the a loose manure, but I'd like to slow it down some. We're slowing it down some now with some hay for the calves. We've weaned on these crops, cover crops. They're eating more hay and they've slowed that stuff down. They're gaining weight and they look great, but next year I will not plant as many brassicas. Of course, there again, we've got several clovers in there and vetch and several other legumes in there also, but actually we need more of a grass-based product for these animals. But that just proved to me that that is, my thinking is correct. We need more grass. They actually claim in a pasture, permanent pasture, you should not have any more than 15 to 20% legumes in that sward.
Yeah, radishes and the brassicas, they give such great growth that, you know, they're really good to get in there, but definitely always a good point that you need some sort of fiber source out there. They shouldn't be intaking 100% of their intake, which obviously they weren't in your situation, but they can have serious health issues if that's all they're eating. I mean, you did have a diverse mix, so you didn't see that issue, but always a good point for anybody thinking through a cover crop mix following wheat or something like that. You saw the picture we had oats paired with it. Or feeding hay, like you said, is always a good thing. So I'm going to give you maybe one or two more pictures, and then we better stop for some questions as we get close to the end here.
Okay, this here was taken about a week ago. That field above the pickup truck, there's kind of that's the field of wheat that we're going to hopefully, we're going to hopefully harvest that as wheat again next year with all these multi-species in there. This is calves we've weaned. There is one cow, the second one from the left up front here. She was very motherly and got back in with her calves. Yes, that's her there. And we will remove her. But these are the calves, and they will leave there again. They will leave. We basically, there's about 80 calves in there, and we'll give them, right now I'm giving them about 6 5-gallon buckets of fines out of my drying system. And we won't feed them any whole corn or corn that we've combined. We'll feed them fines basically all winter. There's a good example of that was last year's calves. We'll throw out some small square bales, make piles of pads and put grain on top of them. And those calves, this might have been January last year, probably middle of January. Those cattle, since we've been doing this the last 2 years, this will be our third season of not putting calves in a barn, are the healthiest animals we've ever raised. They're that hair coat that's on there. We've got some tame ones in there, and you scratch their backs and they're just normal temperature, that 102, you know, and they're warm, they're healthy, they're happy. The only time they actually cough is when they get a snoot full of bees wings out of those piles, and then they'll cough and hack around a little bit to clean that out. But it's just been a delight. I don't have to transport feed. I do transport feed to them, but I don't have to make corn stalks to bed up with. I don't have to haul manure. This field was actually strip grazed in the fall, and then they're running on the entire field right now, so they can get, depending which way the wind blows, they can get a little shelter. But there's hardly any tree mass or anything that they can get into on these, but they just do great. They just do great.
Yeah, it's a hard thing for people to get over. I try to explain that to people all the time. Oh, they see that snow on their back and they think it's such a terrible thing. It's like, no, that's such a good sign, because it means they're not melting it off, right? They're insulating their body so much that the heat isn't even getting out enough to melt that snow off. So it's actually a good sign to see that snow on their backs and not getting melted off. So
a lot of the hair on those animals, I've taken a picture. You can scratch them and put your fingers straight up, and that hair will be up past your knuckles. You know, you're about 3-4 inches length of hair, and they will grow into that through the fall and the winter by doing what they're doing. And it's just amazing. I tell people the only thing that you should put in a building is your machinery and your grain. The livestock need to be outside.
So I guess real quick, Nicole, better check in as we get in towards the end here. What you want to do timeline, if there's any questions, or how you want to wrap things up here for the last 10 minutes.
Yeah, thank you both for that discussion and those insights. Some really good visuals and some pictures in there, so I appreciate that. I haven't had any questions come up in the chat box, but if anyone has a question, please feel free to unmute and we can kind of go through some of those now.
I can give Greg a quick question while people are thinking. Can
Yep,
you,
that's great.
how obviously you're reacting every year to what's going on. There's no set plan, but I'm a farmer. I like a set plan. I want to think through my rotation. I want to think through what's going to happen next year, what's going to happen after that next crop. So can you articulate as best you can what kind of a rotation that you're seeing here? Are you looking at corn one year, soybeans next year, then wheat, then small grain? Are you starting to put this together in some sort of, obviously a long-term rotation, but are you able to start thinking of it in terms of this year's this, next year's that, and third year is this, or is this always going to be just kind of reacting to whatever's happening within the year?
Yes, I'm going to just answer yes. We farm about 2,200 acres, and all of my crop ground is no-tilled. We plant a lot of our crop ground, a high percentage green every year. We are all non-GMO seed. We're the whole program. We know what we're going to do. We raise food grade soybeans. We've got, of course, wheat, rye for grain, and then forages. There's no set pattern. I like to do a corn bean oscillation, you might say, but I definitely want cover crops after every crop. We're 100% cover cropped right now, except for 30 acres north of our buildings, where we have cattle on stalks, which we're going to move off today. And I don't think we're going to get it seeded yet today, but maybe we can catch this when it starts freezing on the backside with cereal rye. We do have plans. I've got certain fields planned out for the next couple of years. Other fields we don't. There's been different timing that we started these fields into the regenerative practices also. So we're just all over the board. If I had to write it all down on paper, it'd take me longer to write it down than try to keep it in my head. And there again, things change from day to day, month to month, year to year. Example, this wheat trial we're going to try to do 60-inch row compared to 30-inch row corn, and then with cover crops. Where the farms where the livestock are at, we're going to do more. We have done a fair amount of 60-inch row corn, maybe not as successful as we'd like to be, but we're working on that situation too, because I think that's a huge benefit for the soil and the livestock. So yeah, it's not as simple as a crop farmer, maybe 2 years corn, a year of soybeans, or a corn soybean rotation, whatever, but so much more fulfilling, and working with the livestock, and even the livestock underneath the ground, you might say, with all the microbes and earthworms and everything too.
Good. Well, I can see a couple of quick questions in the chat then that we can go over. I can just read them off if that works. But Doug,
yeah, that works.
Asking me about giving up my wheat. So as I mentioned, we've had wheat in the rotation for a number of years, and he's kind of asking why we moved away from that. A couple of reasons. Number one, we were really struggling the last few years with wheat quality, as well as yield. Our wheat yields just had not kept up to where they should be. We're not too far north for double cropping. There are some guys starting to make it happen as kind of the falls become warmer. They're not getting huge yields, but there are some guys around that are really pushing the envelope, getting their wheat harvested a little bit earlier and getting out there and getting that double crop beans in there quicker. We were always kind of going the livestock side, getting some sort of cover crop out there, partially because I can't do anything that fast. These guys, they're maybe drying the wheat a little bit. They're out there that night. I give them all credit. They really take it serious as far as getting those double crop beans in up here to get that success. So what we were finding is just from the economics of it and also just the timeliness of it. As I mentioned, I work an off-farm job, so it just became a little difficult to deal with the combine at that time of year, getting things out ready to go, getting it harvested timely, and then having a few years with some significant discounts as a result of disease issues within the wheat kind of made us move away from it. It is something maybe in the future we'll take back up again. But for now, we've decided it's probably just best to concentrate on corn and soybeans. Another quick question from Jenny, looking for some thoughts on small scale cover crop seeding without a seeder. Looks like you're talking about some small acres and trying to get something out there. You mentioned that you're right now just kind of broadcasting by hand after your cows have grazed the paddock in order to get something up and growing. So you do about 3 acres each year in summer forage and winter cover, all for feeding your dairy cows. So far, I've just come behind the cows right after they grazed it and broadcasted the seed and hoped for the best. I'm in Kentucky, so generally get enough rain. Any other ideas or possible tools to look at that scale? Off the bat, I wonder about spreading the seed ahead of the cows, if that would be a possibility for what you're doing so that the hooves could incorporate it into the ground a little bit. Obviously, you need to make sure you're not using any type of treated seed or anything like that. That would be a problem that they might pick up. But yeah, if you're looking for some of them, that might get a little bit more of incorporation. Otherwise, small scale drag harrow, something like that, that would be behind a 4-wheeler, some of that smaller scale machinery that's available. So I'm not sure if you have any follow-up to that, if that's the kind of information you're looking for, or Greg, if you have any other thoughts. You're feeding it through the cow. Obviously, that's a possibility, maybe not the best scenario for an actual cover crop to get up and going. That's more of a long-term improving your pasture situation.
I would agree with you, Jim. That's what the same thought went through my mind is actually put it out there a couple of days before, or 4 or 5 days before you're going to move them and let them incorporate that. I think that would be your best option. If you wanted to try that, see if you could improve things.
Yeah, I will. Thank you. I haven't done it that way. I just always feel like I want to see a little bit more ground before I put the seed in, but that makes total sense to let them help get it in while they're there grazing.
All right, any final questions?
Doesn't look like it. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We will share the webinar with you by email shortly. With that being said, our next session, the 3rd in the 6-part series, will be Tuesday, January 11th. And the session will cover how to determine cattle breeds to best fit your regenerative grazing operation. And you can see our website for the upcoming sessions and to register. So thank you all.
Thanks all.